Assalamu alaikum, bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, we're here, we made it. It's been a hard, even though we just saw you guys on Sunday, it's been a hard couple of days. And so thank you to everyone who's been praying. Sheikh has definitely been fighting the good fight against pain. And it's interesting, when we have these moments where we're struggling with pain, of course, and illness, it takes us back to when things have been so difficult in the past. And alhamdulillah, I was sharing with some of the students some of the stories, because we have so many stories, and they were saying, you should share some of these stories from the past, because there are just so many opportunities to learn from illness and pain. And as I said before, if you haven't experienced it either yourself or with a family member, you truly don't. It's hard to relate. It's hard to relate. It's hard to see. We had even some people who saw Sheikh while he was really ill and going through one of these pain episodes, and it's shocking. I mean, it's really uncomfortable and it's very painful. And I think part of why there's so much learning to be had is that these situations force you to sit and confront what you would never want to choose to confront by yourself. It's like when someone is sick, especially someone you're related to, your spouse, your parent, your child, you can't just run away. You have to sit with them. You have to be with them. You have to take care of them. You have to force yourself to see and to feel and to do what you normally would not want to do. And so I spoke about this last time, how this was so foreign to me before. And even just being able to sit with someone for an entire day and really just kind of walk away just because you have to go to the bathroom or you have to do something like that, but then you just want to come back and be with that person. That's extremely difficult. And it's really interesting too, because it reminds me of certainly all of the times that we went to the hospital, and I think that the ethic that we are supposed to learn, and that is probably very fundamental to Muslim culture, even if Muslim culture doesn't realize this is Islamic or not, is just how you treat the ill, right? So like Sheikh was funny. He was sharing also some stories with us, and one of the stories that I thought I would share is when he was talking about how his Sheikh, when he was very young, got very sick, and this was I think in Egypt or Kuwait, but there were so many students that came to be at the bedside of his Sheikh that the doctor came in and said, "What are you doing? You're taking up all of his oxygen. You guys need to leave." It's like there was standing room only. He couldn't even get in to the bedroom, and it had to be out in the hallway. It was like just completely packed of people who came to show their love and support. And the doctor got upset, and the wife finally said, "Okay, you guys need to go home." Sheikh was really dedicated, didn't want to leave. Refused to leave, actually. He's like, "No, I want to be here, while my Sheikh is ill." And the wife had to finally tell his friends, take him and go home, And so he was forced to go home. And then of course, at Fajr, they got up to pray and came right back. So, and it was like something that I have never seen or witnessed or experienced, but that's something that I think is so beautiful. And certainly in our experience of all the times that we've been ill, we haven't had that experience. For example, in 2013 when Sheikh had a heart attack, we were in Los Angeles, and I remember we felt so helpless and alone. You're really vulnerable at that time. And I remember Sharif had sent out a tweet asking for people to pray. People knew we were in Los Angeles. We lived there for so many years, and people knew us in the community. And this community is very well known for throwing all kinds of parties and being there for one another. But in the midst of this heart attack, we were really alone. And the only person that came and brought us dinner one night, subhanallah, was Rami, who was a student here. His mother had cooked, and they lived in Orange County, which was like a 2-hour drive away. And he brought this, you know, I still remember lentil soup. It was so good. And I like drove it 2 hours just to bring it to our house. And, you know, we were just sort of like, we were so grateful, and yet at the same time dumbfounded because, you know, we lived in Los Angeles. So Los Angeles is its own county. And Orange County is another county 2 hours away. So no one in our county, in our community, came forward and helped. You know, you're supposed to like cook dinner, bring food, help do things for a sick family so that the family members don't have to worry about normal types of things. And they can just care for the person who's ill. Like that is the Islamic ethic. You know, people step up and start doing things for the family. And so in the midst of a heart attack where he literally, we didn't know whether he was going to survive or what the situation was, the only person who helped was one person, one family from Orange County. So, you know, it was just so striking. But I think so much of it is also like a function of the society that we live in, because, you know, we spent a lot of time in hospitals. And, you know, those are really, like Sheikh was just recounting a story today that I wanted to share. I mean, I remember like when I would go with him, you know, whether it was like a, you know, a test of some sort, or, you know, or being in the hospital where, you know, you're like just there for days and days on end. And, you know, I would be there, or Tarek, his brother, would be there, or a family member, you know, someone, we would always make it a point that someone would be staying with Sheikh. And the thing that was so striking is the nurses were shocked. Like they were always like, oh, you have a family member here. Like it was so strange for them to see family members there. It's like people were ill in the hospital beds, you know, in the rooms down below, you know, on either side of the hallway, and you would not see family members, or family members would come and bring something and leave, you know, and it was like, it became the responsibility of the nurses to care for family members. And it was really heartbreaking because, you know, like after the family members would leave, you know, oftentimes, like Sheikh was recounting, you know, he would always be in a room, like within earshot of someone on the verge of death. And that person, whether it was a woman or a man, would oftentimes be in the last, you know, like hours or moments, and they would literally just be crying out. And I mean, I would hear that because I was there too, and it would be people that, like there was a woman that we remembered that was like, I just want to go home. I just want to go home. I just want to go home. And like literally for days, that's all she would say. She'd say like, no, you know, leave me alone. I just want to go home. Or another man who would also be like crying in pain, where no words, it was just like, like these are things that I remember, you know, and you cannot leave. You're in the hotel, I mean, in the hospital bed, you're in, you know, you can't not hear that. And it's so painful. And then you start thinking about, okay, these people are alone. Where's their family? You know, they're obviously on their deathbed. You know, and sometimes it's like scary because like Sheikh would hear people like right before they die reacting as if they see something very scary, and then they would shortly thereafter die, but they would be screaming and reacting to whatever it is that, you know, they were seeing. We of course know that it could very easily have been, you know, angels of, you know, coming to collect a soul that didn't live a very good life. And, you know, this was not something, this was something that would happen often. And what was also very striking is the attitude of the nurses, because obviously they're left to care for people who come in and out. They had to develop, you know, a bit of a thick skin, and they were very, like, noticeably cold. You know, like I remember with the woman that was asking to go home, they would talk about her as if she was insane. It's like, yeah, she just, you know, don't mind her. She's just there, you know, wants to go home, whatever. Like that was their attitude about it. And, you know, you cannot help but be in these situations and think about yourself. You know, like how would I feel if I was here in my hospital bed by myself, listening to these people calling out in pain? And Sheikh was often like that, because there were times where we didn't have family members and I couldn't stay with him overnight. You know, we had Mito, who was young at the time, and there were many nights where I had to leave to take care of Mito, and Sheikh was there by himself in the hospital bed with no family members. And so he was recounting how the woman who was crying to go home was just suffering so much that he started doing prayers for her, and he started like asking God, you know, please, whatever sin she's committed, she's suffering so much, please just, you know, have mercy on her and take her soul and end the suffering. And when he started making that prayer, not long after she left, she died. And after she died, he was saying that at one point when he got up to walk around, he entered that room and, after she was gone, and found that there was like a little bag of her belongings, and there was like a scarf and maybe like a little notebook or a little wallet or something like that, and then also the dress that she wore when she came in. And so he asked the nurses, well, what's going to happen to all of that? And the nurses told him, well, we contacted the family members, but they didn't respond, so it's really going to be up to the disposal crew, and they're just going to throw it away, So these are things that are just, again, you would never want to confront that unless you had to, but these are things that are a gift in a way, because when you experience that pain, it forces you to think. Forces you to reflect on your life. Like, think about these people, they had full lives, they had dreams, they had families, and if they didn't live a good life, think about people who pursue the zukhruf, right? And they wanted their job and their, whatever. I mean, we don't know what these situations were, but in the end, it all comes back down to that. You could end up in a hospital room by yourself. If I'm sure for people who lived very good lives, kind lives, you would hopefully at least have your family members with you in your last moments. But how many people, live their last moments alone in a hospital room somewhere? And so that, it's a really, I think it's a gift to be forced to think about that early on. And think about how does that affect your behavior, how you treat people who are ill. What is your empathy level for people who, could be alone, and how do you want to be treated? We've also had conversations here, again, about like, okay, when you imagine you being that person laying in bed, and, who do you want with you? Like, when the moments when I've been sick, like, I would just want, someone I love sitting next to me all day long, but who can do that, So I think it's just, again, it's a real gift to learn from that, regardless of how painful it is. But so just to, we have, again, so many stories, but and I guess the last point I was going to say is, it's not that far away, especially when you are in the midst of a pandemic, because it's like how many young people have passed away that never thought that they would get sick, and now they're gone. And that this can happen at any moment to anyone. So, it's again like that. The lesson we learned in the Surah, I think it was Ghashia, about how, like, time is this construct. We always think that we have more time. We always think that, we don't have to worry about, our actions or our choices or even, whatever's going on in our life, because somewhere in the future, who knows what's going to happen, right? But if someone were standing there with a gun to your head, and that was the moment at which you had to make a crucial decision that affected where you would be in the hereafter, your sensitivities change, and your decision making changes. So through the gift of the education of this surah, if you remove that time element and you think about the actions that you take and their immediate impact, that changes the way you live your life. And I think that's an extremely valuable lesson that you get, aside from the surah, from just interacting with people who are ill. So anyway, inshallah, I hope that, this is not the new normal of dealing with, illness, but, every opportunity is an opportunity to grow and to reflect and to change your behavior, to increase your empathy, and to help serve others who need help, so that, when your time comes, that God will send people to help take care of you, hopefully in mercy and kindness, and not just a cold nurse, in the hospital that's doing her job. So anyway, with that, I'm really looking forward to another surah. What we're going to do today is, I know we didn't do the Q&A for Surah Al-Kahf, but Sheikh wanted to do Surah Al-Allah, so we'll do the surah first, and then we'll do the Q&A for both at the end, inshallah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. الحمد لله رب العالمين سبحان الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين خاتم الأنبياء والرسل أجمعين وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن اتبعوا بإحسان إلى يوم الدين يا رب. اللهم يا رب يا علي يا عظيم اللهم لا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به اللهم لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا واخطأنا اللهم لا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا اللهم يا رب لا تكلفنا إلا وسعنا واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الظالمين يا رب العالمين. I know I am paraphrasing the last ayat of Surah Al-Baqarah. I'm not reciting them as they were revealed, but paraphrasing them. But the important thing is the dua that comes from the heart. May Allah not ask us to bear more than we can. May Allah forgive our mistakes. May Allah not charge us except with what we can bear. And may Allah's forgiveness and mercy always be there for us. For me, I want to say, just for the sake of having it on the record somewhere and for history, my heart tells me that the teachings that I've offered in books like The Search for Beauty in Islam, Conference of the Books, or the more demanding approach of reasoning with God, or the, I think, very accessible commentary on the Quran, I believe, and Allahu Alam, and Allah knows better, Allah knows best, that all of this are very important seeds for the trajectory of our system of belief in the decades to come. And illness, remember the Prophet ﷺ said that when Allah takes knowledge away from a people, the way that Allah does that is to strip away scholars from a community. In my humble opinion, Allahu Alam, Islamic circles are full of noise, repetitive, redundant, mind-numbing noise. There is hardly, in all the chit-chatter that goes on in so many circles, there is hardly an original thought, a creative idea. And illness always reminds me that everything is a window of opportunity. I pray to Allah that there will be Muslims out there that will understand, that will see the value in what is being offered, and that will want to create the institutions, because the thought by itself, as the Quran itself teaches us, without the institutional framework that preserves and nurtures and grows this thought into various applications, and various relevances, thought becomes like the seed that you throw on the ground, and that is haphazard, doesn't necessarily produce anything, regardless of how good the seed is. But if the soil isn't there for the seed, nothing happens. I really pray that there will be Muslims out there that will help preserve this thought and help students that would be committed to studying and developing and nurturing and advancing and propagating this thought. Because illness does really remind you of all the things Grace was talking about. And it really reminds you that, like so many people I've known in my life that are not around anymore, each one of us is a narcissist. All human beings are narcissists to one extent or another. We really think that the world is going to end when we end, and it's not. And like all the people that you've known that are now gone, in an instant, it could be your turn. I just pray that Allah allows me to download as much as I can before my time comes, and that whatever I download will receive the support that is needed, because our state as Muslims in the world is very desperate, very desperate. Before we begin Surah Al-A'la, I want to underscore something about Surah Al-Kahf. I mean, one of the things that happens with pain is that you don't exactly remember everything that well. But just in case, I want to restate it so it's very clear. Surah Al-Kahf is, as I'm sure you know, is one of the most profound surahs in the Quran. And we could talk about so many things in Surah Al-Kahf. But in the core of what this surah does, the core of it, the essence, is that it offers you models. All the models have to do with resisting oppression and injustice. The people in the cave who withdrew to the cave, they didn't withdraw to the cave because the society they lived in was a just society. They didn't withdraw to the cave because the government that ruled their society was a nice government or a just government. They withdrew to the cave as a form of resistance to oppression and injustice. They realized that confrontation would have meant destruction. But Allah communicates to us, like Allah has did in Surah Al-Ghashiyah, that time, our perception of time, is far from objective. That time itself is very relative. So, for their message, 300 years, for them to come to wake up, and shortly after they wake up, they realize that 300 years plus, or 309 if Hijri years, have passed, and that during this time society has completely changed, and then they die. That's the narrative. And the narrative, of course, is that sometimes truth requires that type of withdrawal into the self. And as I said, although we Muslims unfortunately are often taught that every new thing is a bid'ah, and every bid'ah is a dalala, and every dalala is a nar, this is very dangerous. Can you imagine people that prohibit creativity? What do you think will happen with these people? So I underscored that if you reflect upon the text of the Quran itself is telling us a response to injustice in which you disassociate yourself from the disempowered and weak and oppressed is never permissible. That is never an acceptable moral choice. Now, I'll tell you, we already, as Muslims, we fail on that test. Because I'll tell you, in so many Islamic centers that when I was younger, I was involved with, there was always the cliques for the rich and a clear awareness of those who were doctors, those who were engineers, those who were in tech companies, who had money. They were very aware of the fact that they had money, and they had their own social circles that were clearly distant and apart from the circles of people who didn't have money. And that is a huge moral failure. And in my opinion, Allah will never aid a movement or a thought that embraces that type of discrimination. The other thing that I emphasize is that Allah tells us when you are tempted to give in to the demands of prestige and zukhruf, because these types of social demands are very serious. The social demands that say people belong to certain circles, certain zip codes, certain neighborhoods, certain schools, all the things that define us as human beings. Allah says, adhere to the Quran. Hold steadfast to the Quran. Make the Quran your companion. And I suggested the idea of the Quran becoming our cave. That sometimes when dissemination and expansion is not possible, you withdraw into the Quran, and the Quran becomes your hisn, your fortification. Then Surah Al-Kahf presents us with the second model, a model where again we meet a pompous, arrogant, rich person, but so pompous and so arrogant that this rich person imagines that they have a claim, a demand upon God, that in the hereafter, if any is going to be wealthy and rich, it's going to be me, because of course I'm so wonderful, I'm so brilliant, I'm so accomplished, I've done, whatever. And Surah Al-Kahf presents us with the model of intercourse through discourse, where you are actually engaging the wrong way, the shaitani way, in discourse and conversation, and with the prayer that Allah will, in the end, give the righteous way, will allow the righteous way to prevail upon the wrong way. So, but that you can't control, but you do your part in the type of conversation that we saw in Surah Al-Kahf. But then Surah Al-Kahf takes us to a third model, and if you reflect upon the third model and think about it carefully, you find again forms of oppression. You find an unjust society in which there are rulers who oppress people by taking what is not theirs. Whether they're taking a ship or taking a cow or taking taxes or taking whatever they're taking, or taking your freedom, it doesn't matter. They're taking what is not, they're not entitled to. And then you find another form of injustice, but this time it's a cultural form of injustice. A type of injustice where children do not honor their parents, so the structure of hierarchy for respect and dignity has broken down. By implication, it's not this is a society that is doomed to die. And I believe the whole story of Khidr killing that young man, the ghulam, is a metaphor for the whole death of a society in which children don't respect their parents, younger people don't respect elders, the people don't respect their teachers, people who don't respect those who are more pious or look at them as examples or models to be imitated. That society is doomed to die. It's doomed to be destroyed. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's a society that will be eaten away by drugs, by gangs, by alcohol. It's a society that will be undone because the social fabric is undone. Then we come to the third example, and that's a culture, a society that has another type of injustice. It's a society that doesn't care about the disempowered, like the orphans, doesn't care about Allah tells us, take care of the wayfarer, the traveler, the destitute. But this society does exactly the opposite. It doesn't care about the travelers, it doesn't help the destitute, and it doesn't care about orphans. And the remarkable thing is the contrast in Surah Al-Kahf between Musa alayhi salam, which represents Mosaic law, i.e. the paradigm of law, with Khidr, who represents real moral social problems that law might not be able to fix. Law cannot get a child to respect his parents or her parents. Law cannot get you to respect someone who's more knowledgeable than you. Law cannot tell you to go seek a teacher and respect your teacher. Law cannot do that. Law cannot change what is in the heart. That's the remarkable dynamic that had, to say profound is inadequate, more than a profound impact on the trajectory of the emergence of Muslim culture and Muslim society. And then finally, the Dhul Qarnayn example, which now you have again the same dynamic of ignorance and oppression and injustice. But here, the advocate is not someone who's so weak that they're going to withdraw in a cave, or someone who's so weak that they're just talking to the unjust and saying, please change your ways. Here, the advocate is someone who is aided with real power, the marriage of goodness to real power. Dhul Qarnayn represents piety with power, but that power comes from knowledge. All knowledge is inspired by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you pursue knowledge, what you are doing, you are effectively asking Allah for permission to share what is Allah's. And Allah either grants that permission or doesn't grant that permission depending on the effort you expend. And there could be other things, but primarily the tax that you have to pay is effort. So Dhul Qarnayn meets the first group of people, and Dhul Qarnayn teaches them justice. The second group of people are so primitive that they're better left alone. The third group of people, Dhul Qarnayn, again, it doesn't matter who this person is, we can even consider Dhul Qarnayn a symbolic construct. Why he's called Dhul Qarnayn is because, I believe, is because he combines empirical knowledge with ilm al-ghayb, with religious knowledge. And that's why he's called Dhul Qarnayn. Not, literally translated as the two-horned. But it's not two-horned, it's like having the two destinies. Two anchors. Al-ilm wal-iman. These are the anchors, knowledge and iman. And he refuses to take money from these oppressed people, the people who are oppressed by the powers of Ya'juj and Ma'juj, the powers of evil. and chaos. And he teaches them something extremely valuable that requires a lot of commitment and dedication and application. If you are a student of Surah Al-Kahf and you are getting ready to build the first Islamic experiment in establishing a just society, understanding and internalizing Surah Al-Kahf becomes indispensable. Go back with this understanding and revisit Surah Al-Kahf until you memorize it. And the Spirit, its Spirit, will speak to your soul. And you will see precisely the entire flow of this amazing revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So Surah Al-A'la, although you have in the Islamic tradition reports that claim that Surah Al-A'la is either Medinian surah or that parts of it was revealed in Medina, these are unreliable. These are clearly unreliable. And the reliable opinion is that it was an early Meccan surah. And in fact, it is very likely that it was the 8th surah revealed in the Quran, right after At-Takwir and right before Surah Al-Layl. I did a tafsir for Surah Al-Takwir and I did tafsir for Surah Al-Layl. So it's a very early revelation, and we notice that all the very early Meccan surah demand that we understand something about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about Allah's self, if you will. So it starts with Sabbih Rabbika al-A'la. We of course, we know that in sujood we repeat Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, and there's a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ attributed to the Prophet that says, commands us in sujood to repeat the first phrase of Surah Al-A'la, which is Subhana Rabbi al-A'la. And when we do our ruku', the Subhana Rabbi al-Azim comes from Surah Al-Waqi'ah. So we are effectively repeating from Surah Al-Waqi'ah in ruku' and repeating from Surah Al-A'la in sujood. And the first Sabbih, which that expression, which of course when we say Subhanallah, for instance, is derived from the same word. It is a word of tanzih, meaning understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and see even just in our speech, like you repeat it even subconsciously, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unlike no other. That's the essence of tanzih, that Allah is singular, and that all logic of creation and causation do not apply to Allah. Which means that not even the logic of time and space can be applied to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when Allah says, سَبِّحِ اسْمَ رَبِّكَ الْأَعْلَى, understand that there are names, and these names, which of course later on the Quran shares with us a lot of these names, are quintessential for understanding the singularity, the tanzih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you say سَبِّحِ اسْمَ رَبِّكَ الْأَعْلَى, the immediate question is, Ismullah, it's to reflect on the name of Allah and the name of a Rabb. And as I said before, that Ar-Rububiyyah always is the essence of giving, and Al-Uluhiyyah is the essence of the one and only who sets the standards, who is the origins of taklif, or the origins of obligations. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is both at the same time, Ilahun wa Rabb. The tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to understand that the equation of justice is that Allah gives and Allah obligates, and that you are in creation, you are always a part of that fundamental equation that does not apply to Allah, meaning that Allah is not bound to give. Nothing binds Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give or to obligate, but that Allah chooses that for us because it is the essence of what is just, the essence of al-mizan, and the essence of qist, and the essence of adl. So fundamentally, from the very beginning, you are anchored in the understanding that there is no such thing as, well, I can take without worrying about what I have to give. It is a fundamental flaw in aqidah if the attitude is, well, I perform certain acts that entitles me to a certain set of things, and I do not have to think of consequences. So, Tasbihullah means Tanzihullah, the recognizing of the singularity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now this becomes very important when we think of Allahul A'la, because Al-A'la is normally translated as most high. But high here does not connote a spatial relationship. High means supremacy and superiority, but Allah is beyond spatial relationships. So although Allah is Al-A'la, Allah at the same time is a Qareeb, the one who is near. وَأَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ وَهُوَ مَعْكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ. Allah is with you wherever you are. So immediately Surah Al-A'la, like a lot of the very early Meccan surah, alerts you that the fatal flaw of dealing with Allah in terms of human time and space relationships. And as we know, of course, this was very important because it was very different than the Jewish approach to understanding Allah and the Christian approach to understanding Allah. And in fact, to the extent that Judaism and Christianity came closer to the Islamic ideal or the Islamic concept of Allah, it is because of the Islamic influence. But because, again, as I said before, because Muslims don't write history, history is written for Muslims, by non-Muslims, that fact is always ignored. But if you study Christian theology at the time Islam came, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and Jewish theology at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, their conception of God was very different. And from the very beginning, Islam comes and says, Allah is not in a figure, a statue of Jesus in your church. Allah is not in a specific promised land. Allah is not located in a specific spot. Allah is not located in terms of your spatial relationship, your spatial relationships, and that's why Sabbih Isma Rabbika al-A'la becomes so impactful. Okay. Now, there's another meaning to as-subuhiyya, or the concept of sabbih, that sabbih is, as we said, is a term of tanzih, that you recognize the singularity. But sabbih also means a comprehensive understanding that is the result of constant and diligent motion. So that is why in Arabic we say swimming, we call that sibaha. Because the idea was that you are swimming in an ocean. People didn't really think very much of swimming in swimming pools. But you're swimming in an ocean, so you are moving in something that is endless. And at least, you know, in the medieval imagination. So it is also an invitation, as so many of the Sufi-esque tafasir point out, that when you say Sabbih Isma Rabbika al-A'la, it is like saying embark upon a limitless journey to understand the name of your Lord. In the language of Sufi-esque tradition or Sufi tradition, they say, "Isbah bisirrak fi bahri ata'illah," that take your consciousness, take this consciousness, and allow it to transcend, to the extent possible, time and space, to dwell into comprehending the extent of, or the expansiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah has created from, you know, the most insignificant creature that you see to the most remarkable galaxies that you see, the most grand visions to the smallest and most minute visions. And that logic of creation is out of the self. Meaning, again, it is not subject, when it comes to the realm of the divine, your laws of causation and physics and physicality do not apply to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. وَالَّذِي خَلَقَ فَسَوَّى, who fashioned creation, who crafted creation. وَالَّذِي قَدَّرَ فَهَدَى. Now, there have been among traditional tafsirs those who have tried to argue that قَدَّرَ فَهَدَى is proof of predestination and the like. And of course that's not justified, because all قَدَّرَ فَهَدَى means is that realize that you exist in an infinitely measured creation. But Allah could have created this very measured creation, but if Allah didn't give you the intellect and an instinct to comprehend and interact with this measured creation, as measured creation could have been, as measured as it is, if you were just like, the way your intellect was fashioned was that your intellect didn't understand what water is, didn't understand the difference between gaseous substance and a solid substance. If your intellect didn't understand the concept of what you eat for nourishment and what you avoid because it's actually toxic, there had to be a synchronicity between the created intellect and the created instinct and the measured and the carefully measured creation. So even your curiosity to know is part of قَدَّرَ فَهَدَى, part of Hudallah, part of Hudallah. And I know that modern Muslims unfortunately have lost this part of their civilization. But part of Hudallah is that you become curious and you want to learn. And you say, oh, I want to understand how this works. Oh, I see bees. I want to understand their society. I see ants. I want to understand how ants live. That is part of Hudallah. Allah is alerting us to something that is very obvious, so obvious that we miss it all the time. Your impulses, including the impulse to love, the impulse to want warmth, the impulse to want companionship, the impulse to want to understand, the impulse, unfortunately, that is often abused, to want to control your environment. All of these are impulses that are part of what is supposed to be in synchronicity between the carefully measured world and the guidance of the person, the guidance placed in a person. And this is precisely why when the guidance placed in human beings, the hadi of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in human beings, when it is not in sync with the measured world, so the human beings takes the guidance and wants to abuse people, wants to control people, wants to destroy the environment, wants to corrupt the land, wants to kill things that survive for selfish reasons. That is why it is such a sin and a crime. That is why Allah says you deserve hellfire. Because Allah gave you instincts so that you can be in harmony with the measured world. But instead of harmony, you've created abuse. including one of the best things I've read, and I remember, I think this was in Ihya Ulumuddin. Imam Ghazali, rahmatullah alayh, says that Allah, for instance, reminds married people, وَلَا تَنْسَوْا الْفَضْلَ بَيْنَكُمْ. If you divorce, don't forget that there was a sacred bond between you, and there is an obligation of decency. And Imam Ghazali says that this decency is part of Hadiyullah. But he points out that unfortunately he sees people upon divorce become vicious monsters. And he says this is a sin, and a grave sin, because it is a corruption of Hadiyullah. Okay, والذي قدر فهدى والذي أخرج المرعى فجعله غثاء أحوى. Now, of course, the literal translation of this is أخرج المرعى, who created pastures. These pastures are necessary for the life, the sustenance of life. And yet these pastures, part of the logic of their measuredness is that they go through a cycle of disintegration and rebirth. That everything, all the early Meccan, not all, but I mean the nature of the early Meccan surah is that it constantly reminds us that, listen, reflect upon the logic of creation. The logic of creation is wedded to death and rebirth. So why do you think you are an exception? If you reflect upon the mathematics of creation, everything around you tells you, you don't sometimes recognize that it's death and rebirth because you think of things in terms of human time. But if you go beyond human time, you realize everything in this universe is organized around the logic of death and rebirth. So why do you think you are an exception? Your resurrection is just part of that logic. There's nothing, it is the most natural thing. But there is a further meaning to أخرج المرعى فجعله غثاء أحوى, meaning that is often not reflected in translations. And that is أخرج المرعى. We said that the literal meaning is the pastures and that cycle. But أخرج المرعى also is when you create a marta, that's إخراج مرعى. What you create a marta is a pathway. So if I create pathways, I am engaged in the process of إخراج of al-mara'i, plural mara'i, or mar'a singular. And the pathways that are created, and this is often what you encounter in Sufi-esque tafsir. They're the ones that often discuss this at some length, is that the logic of creation is that there are pathways for those who are pathways for لأصحاب اللذات الشهوانية, for those who pursue the road of coveting pleasures. And there are pathways for those who want to pursue something beyond the simple coveting of pleasures. So understand, it's like saying, understand, if I come to my son and I say, if you study, you will pass. What I'm saying is there's a pathway, there's a logic here. You cannot pass unless you study. Studying means passing. What Sufi-esque tafsirs especially talk about at length is that human beings often fail to understand that it's like when you eat chocolate and you want to ignore the fact that, okay, if I eat chocolate, that means a certain amount of calories, that means I might gain weight. No, you might want to ignore it, but you ignore it at your own peril. That's the pathway. And especially in Sufi tradition, they talk about that the reason so many people get lost is not because they intend to be bad or intend to defy God, but because they fail to give the pathways their rights or their due. So they think that, well, I really want to do X, so I'll just do it. What's the harm? But if you go down this road, there are inevitable consequences. It is like logging onto a pathway. And so when if a sheikh is well informed, giving advice to a student, they always say it is not about a indulgence. It is about choosing a pathway in life. So أخرج المرعى فجعله غثاء أحوى is that there are pathways that inevitably lead to very dark, غثاء أحوى, dark and empty places. Understand the pathways that lead to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the pathways that lead to the opposite of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the blackness and emptiness. If you're interested in this is just from memory, I just wrote it right before the halaqah, and so, but this is something I memorized a long time ago, but it gives you, I'm going to just read it in Arabic, and it gives you a sense of like how the Sufi language usually talks about something like this. So they talk about marati' al-rawhaniyya, الأرباب, either الأرباب الأسرار, أرباب الأسرار للجوء للمواهب الإلهية, or alternatively they talk about المراتع الجسمانية لأصحاب اللذات الشهوانية. And what that means is you either, there are pathways that take you to the elevation of consciousness, to understanding the truth about Allah and creation, and in turn make you understand your place in this creation, that the wrongfulness of injustice and so on. And I'll tell you in a second something about this. Or pathways that just make you think that there's... So the Prophet ﷺ, in commenting about Surah Al-A'la, the Prophet ﷺ used to advise Muslims to recite Surah Al-A'la. This was among the surah the Prophet ﷺ would advise Muslims to recite every day. And he would often like to recite it in Surah in Eid prayer, but that he would also, like, it's basically, if you take all the hadiths that mention Surah Al-A'la, the gist of these hadiths is that, is the Prophet saying, don't let a day pass without reciting Surah Al-A'la. And then he commented in this context that the most beloved to Allah are أحب الخلق إلى الله أنفعهم لعبيده in one version, or لعياله in another version, that the most beloved people to Allah are those who benefit the children of Allah. لعياله, children of Allah. So that's what hadith. The other hadith that the Prophet ﷺ also mentioned in the context of Surah Al-A'la, it says, that I'm forgetting the beginning of the hadith, but it basically that the closest to Allah is man يحببني إلى عبادي ويحبب عبادي إلي ويمشي في الأرض بالنصيحة. Meaning that the closest to me, or the closest to Allah, are those who teach people to love me, to love Allah, and who do good on earth, so I will love people, or ibadi, I will love my creation even more. And in Sufi's tradition, this hadith, of course, raised so many discussions. How you as a human being can be an agent to help people fall in love with Allah. And of course, Sufis especially talk at length about, so much rides on how you present Allah to people. What you tell people about Allah. What you tell people about Allah's religion. If what you say scares people and terrifies people and makes people say, oh, this God is, I don't get this God at all. This hadith is although I've not heard in the US, I've never heard any Islamic sentiment, but it is in all the sihah. I mean, it's widely reported in so many versions. But then the other thing is that you have to help create conditions in which people do good, not do bad. Because if they do good, Allah will love them more. So if you create a society in which, for instance, people, in order to survive, have to take bribes, that's exactly the opposite of what this hadith is talking about. If you create a society in which men think they have the right to control women and beat women and insult women, that's exactly the opposite. These are hadiths that, I mean, this discourse is found moral foundations upon which everything else is built. And وَيَمْشِي فِي الْأَرْضِ بِالنَّصِيحَةِ means the way they conduct themselves on this earth is to always be a voice for truth. Unfortunately, a lot of traditional sources, they jump to the nasiha part and they ignore the love part. I remember a long time ago, some ignorant person, I gave a talk about love in Islam, and this person said, what is your dalil that there is love in Islam? And it's such an amazingly ignorant, but it's not her fault. I mean, this was a young Muslim, early 20s or something, but it's not her fault, because the Islam she was raised with censored everything about the essence of what drew people to the Islamic message early on. يحببني إلى عبادي ويحبب عبادي إلي. Make people love me and facilitate or help for me to love my people more. And it is very significant that this was said in the context of Surah Al-A'la, because of course this inspired the entire Sufi trajectory in talking about وَالَّذِي قَدَّرَ فَهَدَى وَالَّذِي أَخْرَجَ الْمَرْعَى فَجَعَلَهُ غُثَاءً أَحْوَى. Okay. Then, after the short introduction, سَنُقْرِئُكَ فَلَا تَنْسَى. We will teach you to recite, so don't forget. Now we'll come to don't forget in a second. إِلَّا مَا شَاءَ اللَّهُ إِنَّهُ يَعْلَمُ الجَّهْرَ وَمَا يَخْفَى. That, of course, there's always, whenever there is a statement of anything in the Quran, there's always the reminder that everything is subject to Allah's will. For Allah knows the external and the internal. There is nothing. You are dealing with Allah, who is beyond space and time, but with a perfect knowledge of the created world. Okay. Or perfect knowledge, period. So, سَنُقْرِئُكَ فَلَا تَنْسَى. There's an interesting debate in the Islamic tradition. We will teach you to recite the Quran. Is it saying, and this is a grammatical debate, is it saying that so you will not forget? So Allah has decreed that what the Quran will teach you, you as a matter of divine will, you will indeed retain it in memory completely? Or is it saying we will teach you the Quran so as a command, so don't forget it? So in other words, make sure that you don't forget it. And the majority said it's the first, not the second. But the reason for this debate, just so, is that there are hadiths. There's one hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ was reciting a surah and he skipped over a verse. And after the prayer ended, people said, we noticed you skipped this verse. Has it been abrogated? And he said, no, I just forgot it. And in fact, again, I jotted it down from memory, but I don't know if I did or not. Yeah, إنما أنا بشر أنسى كما تنسون فإذا نسيت فذكروني. That I am a human being that I will forget just like you. So if I forget, remind me. And so some said, well, if it's possible for the Prophet ﷺ to forget in prayer a verse, so it must be that this surah is a command. So it's like, it's not, because if it was a guarantee that you'll never forget, then you would have not forgotten anything. But as many have noted, I think that's not necessarily the case. I think there's a difference between forgetting because you're exhausted, because you're in pain, because your city's under siege, like in the Battle of the Khandaq. In other words, it's not that you've forgotten, because if someone reminds you, you remember. But it is a momentary memory lapse. And I think the Quran is clearly saying, in my view, that Allah will, in fact, make sure that you retain this Quran when it is important to recite this Quran completely. But that doesn't make you superhuman, and you are going to have these momentary memory lapses like any other human being. Okay. وَنُيَسِّرُكَ لِلْيُسْرَى, وَنُيَسِّرُكَ لِلْيُسْرَى, this is how they translate it. They always translate very literally, and we shall ease thy way unto ease. Yeah, وَنُيَسِّرُكَ لِلْيُسْرَى is that if being with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and reciting, meaning retaining Allah's revelation, Allah is with you, directing you for what is good for you, whether in this earth or in the hereafter. Of course, at the first level, it's talking to the Prophet ﷺ and saying that, don't worry, Allah is with you. But as so many Muslim theologians and commentators noted, that this goes beyond simply a warranty to the Prophet. But if you are with Allah, Allah is with you. But this relationship requires a type of trust that you don't demand things on your time and on your terms. So, you have plans, you get sick, you have pain, and you say, this is extremely inconvenient. Why, Allah? I had all these plans, and I was going to do this, and I was going to do that, and that's not Niyasirka lil-Yusra. Niyasirka lil-Yusra is trusting that whatever Allah presents, it is in a warm, loving relationship because you love Allah, and Allah loves you back. And so, what your reward, whether or your yusr, your ease, could be on this earth, but it could be in the hereafter. It could be now. It could be 10 years from now. It could be 50 years from now. You have the crux of Iman is to let go and to trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you are second guessing why Allah, then you haven't developed that trust. Okay. And of course, سَيَذَّكَّرُ مَنْ يَخْشَى وَتَجَنَّبُهَا الْأَشْقَى. Notice from the very beginning of the revelation, as the Quran time and time again repeats to the Prophet ﷺ, remember, guidance is not up to you. As profound as the Quran is, whatever we give you, you have to remember there will be those who will remember, who will accept the message, and those who are al-ashqa, those who will turn away and will refuse the message. And ultimately, their fate is their fate in the hereafter. Hellfire, where they will not neither die nor live. But ultimately, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى. Now here, the only thing I'll note is that this is 14. There is a sort of, in my view, an unnecessary debate. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى. Some said, well, this means that it's saying those those, or the prosperous, or those who will indeed prosper, are those who pay zakah, meaning pay the zakat al-amwal. And then some said, well, on that basis, this must be a Medinian surah, or this was revealed in Medina because zakah was not revealed until Muslims were in Medina. But قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى doesn't mean those who pay zakah will prosper. It simply means those who purify. Those who purify at-tazkiyah is through prayer, is through fasting, is through helping the needy, is through serving human beings, is through paying zakah, paying sadaqah. All of that is tazkiyah. All of that is purification. وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ فَصَلَّى. The purification, the act of purification which the Quran will repeat and drill into Muslims, that dhikr is the worship, the ibadah, but it must be accompanied by the acts of purification, meaning acts of service. So, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ فَصَلَّى. Dhikr, and in salah, and at this point when Surah Al-A'la was revealed, was still in its very first early form, which is not the full salah that we have now. Okay, then this reminder from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah is aware that the way we are, we prefer life on this earth because this is what we know. But the fundamental core act of belief is to believe in Allah's promise that in the same way that the entire logic of creation is premised on creation and resurrection, rebirth, is to accept Allah's promise that this is but a temporary life and that this is not the real life. But because this is a thing that you accept only if you believe in Allah first and accept what Allah tells you as the truth. Interestingly, this tidbit was often cited by those who argued that belief in resurrection and in the hereafter is not attainable through philosophy alone. Because some argued that philosophy by itself, without revelation, can reach the conclusion that there will be a resurrection and there will be accountability. And you find this ayah often cited in these debates to argue that no, you in fact need revelation. Because philosophy itself will always get stuck with بَلْ تُؤْثِرُونَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا. That you human beings will always gravitate towards what you know because you are human beings created within the limitations of time and space. Okay. And then in هذا في الصحف الأولى صحف إبراهيم وموسى there are hadith related in this context. The translation, the study Quran, truly this is in the scriptures of all the scriptures of Ibrahim, Abraham and Moses, Ibrahim and Musa alayhi salam, that there are hadiths that in which the various companions asked the Prophet ﷺ how many scriptures were there, and then in relation or in response to this revelation. And they say, how many scriptures were there? And then the Prophet said, well, you know, there was X number of scriptures for Moses, X number for Jesus, X number. And some hadiths even say that, well, there were scriptures revealed for the Prophet Ibrahim ﷺ. And in some of these hadiths, the Prophet even starts reciting some of the scriptures revealed to the Prophet Ibrahim. I didn't study the chains of transmissions of these ahadith to the extent that I would have liked. But I'm very skeptical about these ahadith. I'm very skeptical about their authenticity. I have, from the research that I did do, I tend to believe that these were originated as opinions of early tabi'een, early successors of the Prophet, and then that with the passage of time, rufi'at ila nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, the ahadith marfu'a, that then they went from being attributed as the opinion of a successor to actually being a hadith of the Prophet. But we don't need to get stuck on this point. What we do need to remember is from the very beginning, and this is important because, again, Orientalists have confused Muslims a lot about their tradition. And, you will read supposedly respectable scholarly opinions by Orientalists that the Quran was never interested in Musa and Isa and Ibrahim until the Prophet encountered Jews and Christians in Medina. Well, this is so ridiculously flawed. And from the very beginning, from the very early revelation, is the insistence by the Quran and by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this same core message, there is nothing different. When Allah is saying, look beyond your material world, exist in harmony with your carefully crafted and carefully measured world, this has been the same message from the very beginning, from the father of Muslims, the Prophet Ibrahim ﷺ, to the Prophet that most closely resembles the legacy of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and that's Musa, because Musa was a head of state and also a bearer of scripture. And that's the same fundamental message time and again. That's Surah Al-A'la. It's a powerful, poignant reminder, but it's easy. The temptation is to memorize it and just recite it quickly without reflecting on it. But remember, within these very few eloquent words is like turning your clock, like saying, turn on to understanding your cosmos. Turn on to understanding that while your God is beyond the law of creation, the laws of creation clearly points to your God. And that's no small feat. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
I thought that I would share one more story from the sidelines of pain this morning, which was really, really beautiful. And it was so beautiful. I mean, honestly, it's like, okay, I've been married long enough now that I know from certain words and certain tonality, grab the recorder. It's like a story is coming that we have to capture. So I was saying to him that, while he was in pain, a lot of times when he is not feeling well, we will turn on the Quran. And so we were playing Surah Al-Kahf from YouTube. And it was Abdul Basit, who was doing the recitation. And this particular video on YouTube had like the English translation, and so we could read, you know, the words, the English translation of the surah as it was going. And it's like, I don't know how many times we actually played it, you know, in the last several days, probably, you know, 50, 100 times, it felt like. But, you know, so while like I was sitting with Sheikh and looking at the translation as it was going, and, you know, and then remembering, like, well, first, before we had Surah Kaf, it was like, I wonder what the halakha is going to tell us, because now, as I've mentioned before, I have just given up on reading the English translation before. There's no point, because it has nothing to do with what we actually learn and the richness of what we go through in the halakas. So, but I was just sort of curious, like, okay, you know, what does this surah really talk about? And then after we had the halakha, and then I went back again, and, you know, we were playing it again, and I was looking again, I'm like, oh my God, this is nothing like what we learned in this halakha. And I don't know how many, I could have watched it 100 more times, I still would not have gotten anything from what we learned. So I said to Sheikh, you know, I told him this, and I said, I honestly, I just don't get it. Like, how is it that even the early Muslims at the time that they were receiving this message, you know, they're hearing the same words? Like, what accounts for that vast difference between what we read in an English translation and what the early Muslims received? Like, is it just the Arabic language? Is it just the context of, you know, where they received the message? And he said, yes, the Arabic does make a difference. Yes, the context makes a difference, but you have to understand, like, when you think about, you know, poetry, for example, he said, if we were to read, like, poetry of today to someone even, you know, a few hundred years ago or back at that time, they would have no idea, like, what our poetry means or what it's talking about. And we have to understand that back at the time, like even at the time of Shakespeare, people would read Shakespeare and they had a completely different understanding of it than we have of it now. And so back at that time, you know, poetry was the way, it was like, you know, like the way we listen to popular music today. Or even classical music is another example where, you know, back at the time when everyone listened to classical music, they understood the meaning of it because it was interwoven in their life and the way they understood things. Like today, when we go back and we understand classical music or poetry, we have to read books to try and access the meaning of what did these things mean. But back at that time, because, you know, this language was so, like, the way the Quran spoke, he said, you know, I'm convinced, like, if, and I hope I'm doing this justice, and, you know, maybe you can help me add in if I miss it, but he said, you know, the way that people understood the message at that time, it was so interwoven in what they were doing that for us today, he's convinced that, you know, this is a message that takes people from darkness to light. And for people to go from darkness to light requires something profound, not something that is pedantic, you know, because I was also talking about, you know, when we were talking about Dhul Qarnayn and, you know, like, who was he, and all of these little debates that people would get into that had nothing to do with the meaning of the surah or the story, you know, he was saying that this is where, like, when you build a relationship and you try to understand, you know, darkness to light, you're hearing the important message of the narrative. You're taking the book seriously. You're understanding what will it take to go from darkness to light, and that this is a book of ethics. You know, it's something heavy duty. It's not something where, you know, we need to debate all the little details. And so he's convinced that when you know, accept, number one, that this is a profound book, it has a profound ethical message, that also the surahs of the Quran have a particular meaning. Like each surah, there's a reason why this is a surah. There was something that was intended to be communicated. And if you build a relationship with the Quran on those premises, like this book is meant to guide you to something better, to something, you know, elevated and beautiful, and you build that relationship, it will start to speak to you in that way. And when you think about what relationship the Muslims of today have with the Quran, you know, they don't see it as a book of central guidance, that, you know, God is giving you something to find your way from darkness to light. They don't take it seriously. They don't, you know, understand that, I mean, this is the first time in our tradition that has approached the, you know, the Quran as each surah having its own meaning. I mean, other studies have approached the Quran thematically overall, but no one has ever said, you know, had the conviction, no, each surah actually has a specific meaning that was intended to be communicated. And I've noticed when you present to us the meaning of, you know, like even a small fragment of a verse that has 5 words in it, you've taken the time to think about, what does this mean? Like, it could have said this, it could have said that. You know, it's stuff that we just recite and we completely gloss over, and yet you take the time to really, like, you know, extract the full meaning of something. And that's where I feel like, oh my God, this approach, you know, like what you're presenting to us is that ethic of taking it seriously and really, you know, so again, just trying to understand, like, how did the early Muslims get that meaning, you know? And so I think that, you know, that was what the Sheikh had told me, and it was so valuable. I recorded it, so inshallah it's there. Did I say that right?
No, you did a good job.
Okay, alhamdulillah. So,
I didn't realize you were recording it.
it's because I'm good. I can turn it on without him noticing. But yeah, so anyway, that's part of my job. But anyway, so I hope that helps, because it helped for me to understand, like, why the English translations are so, you know, so, what's the word? They're unsatisfying. They're so ineffective. They're empty of this meaning, and it's frustrating, you know? I mean, and so if you're not an Arabic speaker, I mean, I guess even if you are an Arabic speaker, you really don't even get this. But, so alhamdulillah. Thank you. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Just that. Alhamdulillah, I just thought I would mention too that one of the, I guess, losses that, well, not losses, but one of the things from the pain is that, again, the professor actually didn't get to prepare, which is interesting, because usually he, you know, takes time to, as I mentioned before, review things and, you know, get good command of it. But alhamdulillah, I didn't notice. I'm sure no one noticed, but just to say, you know, alhamdulillah, that, you know, the level of knowledge is just so profound, and we're so grateful. I mean, I'm so grateful. I don't know how to fully express that, and I feel like, you know, even what you said in this surah about, you know, our responsibility to present a very beautiful tradition so that others will fall in love with it, I think is so profound, and it's so important for our day and age when there are just so many ugly presentations of Islam that turn people away. And everything, I mean, I know from a long time ago, you would always counsel people that, you know, we as Muslims are ambassadors of the faith, and we have to present our faith in the most beautiful way possible. And that's everything from how we talk about it, to how we appear, to how knowledgeable we are, to how vigorously we, you know, fight for justice and appear on the front lines of, you know, whether it's protests or, you know, in academic debates, social justice, you know, positions that we take, that we really should be impressive by humanity's standards today. And unfortunately, you know, we're not anywhere near that. But I think it's so, like, beautiful to see that, to point it out, you know, again, in such a brief surah, you know, something so foundational that, at a minimum, to help others find and fall in love with God. It's just very beautiful. So thank you. Alhamdulillah. Do you want to start us off, Robbie?
Sure.
Thank you again for the lentil soup. It was amazing. Never forgotten.
Thank you. Before I knew Sheikh doesn't like soup.
I know. I loved it.
I mean, yeah, my question is about Surah Al-Kahf, but just about Surah Al-Ala, I think I mean, surah like these and Ala stands out amongst them. I consider some of the most challenging chapters of the Quran because I think intellectually the material today was not difficult, but over and over the message is, it's one thing to comprehend the intellectual message, but internalizing the message and actually feeling it in your heart. I think Surah Al-Ala is difficult, very difficult. And yeah, I think that came across in the tafsir today very strongly. But my question about Surah Al-Kahf is verse 45. What is the meaning of it and the significance of it? مثل الحياة الدنيا كماء أنزلناه من السماء. Yeah.
Okay, so
Can you remind us what that
oh,
verse
yeah,
is, and
oh,
also
yeah.
paraphrase the question?
Well, it's sorry.
Oh, and also, can you let us know what the dhikr are for both Surah Kahf and, well, I assume this one is the whole entire surah, right?
Yeah, it's Ala is the entire surah, but Kaf is. I didn't tell you. Anyway,
You told us offline, but just to tell us officially.
Where is it?
Which I think you said it was 28 was one of them?
28 and 24. Yeah,
28 and 24.
Yeah, 28.
Okay, so 28 was the main one, and then 24 was when you said that you had used the dhikr for a little bit, right?
Yeah, no.
28
Is the main one.
is the main one, and then 24 was when he also used.
Yeah, واصبر نفسك. Yeah,
28
واصبر نفسك. 28 is the main one. And 24 was I used it and then I switched back to 28. I started it was 28 and then I went to 24 and then I switched back to 28. Okay, and the number was
45 that Rami asked about.
So first, Rami is just pointing out Rami is pointing out that like all the short surah, like even like قل هو الله أحد قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد, or قل يا أيها الكافرون, or they're short, the meaning is obvious, but turning it to a lived reality is challenging, and that's what and with Surah Al-A'la, tanzih is a real tanzih, to fully rise to the challenge of tanzih, is a pristine form of iman where you do not associate partners with Allah. So, for instance, you fear no one but Allah. You understand that despite all the false appearances, it is ultimately Allah's will that animates this universe and animates everything that is in existence. And
Can you define tanziyah again?
the tanzih is the not associating or understanding that God is beyond the laws of causality, that God is beyond the temporal world, that is bounded by time and space. So God is beyond time and space. Tanzih is to understand, theologically, then you go beyond that and you say to understand the sifat Allah, the attributes of Allah, and the that, and the true nature of what Allah is. But that gets us into, let's leave that aside because that's always a very difficult philosophical question. But the sifat is to understand the attributes of Allah, Asma'ullah al-Husna, all the attributes, and to internalize these attributes. That's all part of Tanzih. So when you say Sabbih isma rabbika al-a'la, and every time when we do sujood and we say Subhana Rabbi al-a'la, Subhana Rabbi al-a'la, you're putting the intellect, which is all focused here in the center of the forehead, and you're putting it on the ground and you're saying Subhana Rabbi al-a'la. So you're saying the entire thing symbolizes is that Allah, I understand that my intellect dwells in the realm of causation. It understands, it comprehends, it does whatever it does. But ultimately, I understand that this intellect is indebted to you, bound by you, that you are the sovereign of this intellect. And so every time we say Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, we are saying something very profound, something very big, although we don't internalize it. But Subhana Rabbi al-A'la is to understand that Allah is not higher in terms spatially, but that Allah is superior. So although Allah is higher, but Allah is also nearer. That Allah is with you wherever you are. And so the first, if you really internalize Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, if you truly internalize Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, then you exist in full consciousness of the presence of Allah wherever you are and everything you do and everything you say. And if you have that full consciousness, then it becomes very difficult to do anything that is not becoming. Imagine if you truly internalize that Allah is with you everywhere. Would you do anything that, you imagine Allah's gaze upon you? Would you do anything that you would imagine Allah would gaze upon and be disappointed in? You wouldn't. You wouldn't fight with people. You wouldn't argue with people. You wouldn't backbite people. You wouldn't gossip about people. You wouldn't. It just becomes impossible. So it is very profound, but it is an aspiration, and I think Allah knows it's an aspiration. But then the other challenge of Surah Al-A'la is the harmonization, to exist in harmony with Allah's synchronicity. It is, I remember reading in Qadi Abdul Jabbar's Al-Mughni, it's multi-volume, so I don't remember precisely where, but it was where he talks about that he talks about the value of philosophy, and he's talking about why he found reading Aristotle very valuable. And he says, I don't read Aristotle, it's just something to the effect like, I don't read Aristotle to know anything about Allah, but I read Aristotle to understand the logic of creation, which is so intricate and so wonderfully measured that it requires a truly profound intellect or a very advanced intellect and then, but then once you're trying to understand this measured universe, but you must exist in harmony with it, which the word we use for this is justice, qist, the balance. But yeah, it is difficult because to exist in harmony means you don't take anything that is not yours. You don't transgress upon anything that you shouldn't transgress upon. You know your bounds. You're a human being that is completely aware of my limits. And to be completely aware of your limits, you wouldn't hurt anyone. You wouldn't injure anyone. You wouldn't, treat anyone unjustly. And so Rami is right. It is very challenging, but it is also very inspirational. And I think that's why the Prophet ﷺ told us to recite it all the time, in the hope that if you keep reciting it, you will reflect on it. And as you reflect on it, it elevates your consciousness. It cleanses you in, to one degree or another. As to ayah 45, what it says, first, وَاضْرِبْ لَهُمْ مَثَلَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا كَمَاءٍ أَنزَلْنَاهُ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ فَاخْتَلَطَ بِهِ نَبَاتُ الْأَرْضِ فَأَصْبَحَ حَشِيمًا تَذْرُوهُ الرِّيَاحُ وَكَانَ اللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ مُقْتَدِرًا. That the translation is basically that give them a parable, or Allah gives a parable, that life on this earth is like water that comes and mixes with the elements of life to give birth to the matter of life, which is the nabat, the greenery, vegetation, until it withers away and it becomes so weak that it is blown away by wind. And of course, the reason Rami is asking about this is that, okay, so why do we have this particular ayah? I mean, because this ayah is mentioned right after the story of the two people the owners of the rich guy who owns a garden, and the not so rich guy or the poor guy who is debating with the rich guy. And right after that, and right before المال والبنون زينة الحياة الدنيا, that money and children are the zina, the joy of life on this earth, but that what remains is a salihat, goodness. And as we said in the tafsir, that often this is misunderstood, that it is as if money and children are in one camp contrasted to goodness. But that's not what it's saying. What it's saying is that money and children are sources of joy on this earth, but depending on how you use them, they could become baqiyat al-salihat, that they could become the good. So the question really that Rami is asking is, why is this ayah about the parable of life on earth right after the story of the discussion and right before the ayah about children and money and so on? And the crux of it is that it is very similar to the logic of resurrection or the logic of circularity of creation, birth, death, resurrection. But here that, of course, I'm not going to go to the Sufi-esque tafsirs that read the water in a metaphorical way and so on, but that ultimately the essence of life on this earth is, it's like you are taking snapshots. If your snapshot is at the time before there's vegetation, before the crop grows, so at the point where there are seeds and there's water falling, here the snapshot is one of promise, but not one of fulfillment. If you take the snapshot of after the crops have grown and lived for a period of time, but then dried up and are dying, that snapshot is not fulfilling because it is a snapshot of death and the aftermath of life, not life. So the third snapshot is the snapshot of the actual crops in growth. Now, notice what human beings do, and this is precisely why Ayah 45 is there. Human beings avoid thinking of the moving motion picture, and they avoid looking at the snapshot of the beginning, and they avoid looking at the snapshot of the end. And so much of their consciousness is focused on the snapshot of the thriving of life. So they look at, it's like, look at so much of our media, our narratives, the way we our culture. Our culture is so focused on the love story of young people, their first love or their biggest love, or it is so much of our culture is focused on that, the sweet moment, not the work that comes before the birth, not the aftermath after the birth, but that moment of glory, the moment where although I'm not a sports person, but the moment where you win the Super Bowl, the moment where you are falling in love and you have the sweethearts in happiness, the moment where you are dancing and having fun, the moment where you are enjoying. But that is a false consciousness, because it is a selective consciousness. If the narratives led to, after the hot love story, the worry about paying the bills, the debt owed to the IRS, the bickering about finances, the bickering about the children, the divorce court, whatever, we don't want to focus so much on that. But we also don't want to focus at what it took before these people got to the point where they became adults, able to engage in something fun in the first place. And because of that selective memory, we are always seeing life on earth with an endless sense of hopefulness that is often unrealistic in its nature and its demands. Like everyone is waiting, is hoping to be the lottery winner. Everyone is hoping to be the one that has the happy story. This ayah comes and sort of smacks us before telling us, listen, yeah, there's the money, there's the children, there are all the things that come, but it is not a matter of the snapshot of the happy story you tell yourself, but it is a matter of what you do with God, what God gives you. So don't look at the picture of the crops as they grow and say, wow, this is so beautiful, look at this wonderful garden. Look at how do you negotiate, how do you manage the inevitability of destruction? So this death is coming, destruction is coming, but how can you manage that to turn it into baqiyat as-salihat? How can you manage that to turn it into good that lasts? And that's why it comes right there, is, focus on death. After the party, there will be the death. It's inevitable. It's all going to fall apart. So preempt all of that by handling things to create lasting good.
That is why we recommend watching criminal shows, ID channel. We're always fascinated with what happens after the moment of glory and people lose themselves and start killing people and doing crazy things. So anyway, it's good training. And I guess also, illness too, because it focuses you on the end. I think that's delivery. So this is a follow-on question to Rami's question. I know you touched some of it, but maybe let me ask it anyway. You might have more to say. Following Rami's question, it seems like Surah Kaf drives a theme of patience in the face of knowing and living the truth despite familiar or foreign society. How can we cultivate that in our tazkiyah? Tazkiyah is purification, right?
I don't know, patience, there are, maybe this is a bit, I found that there are two pathways to patience. One is the patience that comes from a profound iman, in that you understand that there is an ethical obligation upon you, and you are focused on the performance of the ethical obligation, but you leave entirely consequences to Allah. As a matter of iman, is sort of saying it is just the timing of when people might do this or accept this or not accept this is not my business. That is why people with a deep-seated iman, it is not being pacifist, but it is in fact quite the contrary, because you do what you believe is ethically mandated of you. But you ultimately just accept that the consequences are not yours. That's beyond your jurisdiction. But the other thing that I have become convinced that people who become truly students of knowledge, the thing that you learn when you become a true student of knowledge is how ignorant you are and how vast knowledge is, and how if if you are not patient about learning, you'll lose your mind. You'll become insane. You'll become a joke. And so it's interesting, but I really became convinced that another way that you cultivate patience is becoming a very good student. The more you learn, the more you, and then it dawns on you. It's like when I often talk to people around me about this, is that when it dawned on me, the moment it really dawned on me, the sad reality that I'm going to leave this earth not having read all the books that I want to read. There was a time in my life when you're young and foolish, I really thought I'm going to read all the books that I think I want to read. And I used to, think I'm going to read not just in English or Arabic, but all the languages that I want to read in. And then it just, then the humility, the inevitable humility, it just, you just come to terms with the fact that you're nothing. You're just nothing. You are something very big, but just only because Allah made you something very big by dignifying you as a human being. But objectively, in terms of just pure empirical data, there's just you'll never know, not even as close as much as you want to know. And so any conclusion that, any advice, any conclusion, any thing that upsets you about the way the world is going is tempered by the fact that your knowledge is so limited. Allahu A'lam. So you just that moderates everything that you think, you want, you desire, you work for.
Inshallah, there'll be books in heaven.
Inshallah. Maybe I'll get a chance
Your
to...
library, the soul of your library will be, inshallah, waiting for you.
So I can finally finish. I want to be able to read all the languages too.
Yeah.
Chinese and Russian.
Well, you said in a previous halakha that heaven is as individual as the individuals. So
Yeah,
I
that's
know,
right.
like, my heaven will not have a ton of books in a ton of languages, but yours will, inshallah. Did you have
Ya Rab,
another question? Inshallah.
may Allah just allow us
Inshallah.
to even come close.
Inshallah, inshallah, if we make it.
I'm sure you're going to have a book tree.
I can pluck the books.
My question's on Surah Al-Kahf, that given the effects of globalization on society, how do we interpret what stage would apply most to us? And what I mean by that, to give an example, is you have in our society, we can basically say whatever the heck we want with impunity, but in the Middle East, you will get arrested and killed.
Mm.
But at the same time, we do have kind of a global society, and although we're very not united, we have a global ummah. We influence each other and we impact each other. I mean, we have people who email us from Nigeria who are seeing our material. So what phase do you think we're in, and how do we interrogate what our identity is as a society? Is it just Americans? Is it wider than that?
Well, I mean, if America, whether one likes it or not, America is dominant in the world, and it's like this: the world is still the dominant currency in the world is the American dollar. So that means that by definition, you cannot get around. You know, if you don't like the dollar, you can go to the euro, but the euro itself is heavily influenced and heavily dependent on what happens with the dollar. I mean, it is sort of an alternative without a real choice. Euro, the dollar. And people often overlook this, but this is the flow of information in the world, the geopolitics of the world, the financial institutions of the world. So, and that is why when a group of people got together and decided that they're going to marry American politics to Jesus, the reality, but people just don't. What's the name of that book? They made a documentary about
The family.
the family. If you read that book, one of the things that just unfortunately Muslims don't read, but one of the things that strikes you is that the number of Muslim leaders from the leaders of Muslim countries from all around the world met, dined with, socialized with, attended the parties of the group of American politicians who wedded American politics to Jesus Christ. Even the Saudi politicians, the Emirati politicians, the Qatari politicians, the Omani politicians, they were talking as if Jesus Christ is their Savior, Lord and Savior. It's not because they're Christian, but it is because if they want to play the game in the world today, what happens in America dominates. And then after America, Europe. And then, you have Russia trying to muscle in a little bit, China trying to muscle in. But it's still a world that we're still in the aftermath of the post-Cold War era. So why does this matter? Well, it matters because the fact of the matter is to say we're American Muslims and all we care about is what happens in America and what happens in the rest of the Muslim world doesn't matter to us like the people in the Islamic Center of Southern California do, is idiocy. It's insanity. It's highly immoral because you are at the center of what, it is America that decides who gets to run the holy sites of Mecca and Medina. It is not Muslims. Muslims have no say in, who runs Mecca and Medina, who owns Mecca and Medina, what buildings are built in Mecca and Medina, who built all the renovations in Mecca and Medina that were made. What are the companies that made them, that built all these hotels and built that big clock? And it was American and European companies. Again, so coming to terms with this reality means honesty in discourse. We need to go to the cave and have some very serious and honest thought, not rhetorical, not dogmatic, but profoundly advanced. you know, the level of discourse that I encountered when I was taking courses in economics and politics at Yale. You know, no rhetoric, but empirical facts. Then we can think about, well, how do we manage this ethically so that we have a world that in which, you know, you don't have people that go to the Ivy League schools and then they create this crazy institution that they call the family in DC, where Jesus Christ is supposed to rule the world. Where are we as Muslims? I mean, so in my view, all these people that are persecuted in Muslim countries, A, they have an obligation to try to get out of there. But B, if Allah allows them to get out of there, if Allah doesn't allow them to get out of there, that's a different matter, because then their situation is very difficult. If Allah would have not allowed me to escape from Egypt, I would be dead. I have no doubt about that. I would be in prison, I would be tortured, either I would be a dead skeleton and, you know, living in some Egyptian prison, or I would be killed. Because that's what happens to anyone who dares think out of the mainstream in the vast majority of Muslim countries. So you have an obligation to get out. Well, if you get out, you have to understand that that was a gift from Allah. That was a hijrah. And if Allah gave you this gift, then you have an obligation to try to think about the place of Islam. Islam, as we said, Islam, I take Allah very seriously when Allah says the reason Allah sent this religion is to take you from darkness, من الظلمات إلى النور, from darkness to light. Then the question is, how are we going to contribute? We don't want to dominate. We don't want we don't want to play the game of empires. It's not that we don't want to. In fact, but the question is morality, it's ethics. How are we going to contribute so that we help bring light to the world? Take as many people out instead of the exploitative. Every time a country in Africa or Asia starts daring to think of controlling its own of self-determination, we immediately sweep in and get the military of that country to stage a coup, and then it becomes we buy the military with corruption and perks and gifts, and it's a highly corrupt and immoral world system. There is a book called that every Muslim should read. It's called Coup d'etat. It was written by an American CIA officer, and it basically talks about how a good part of it talks about the Muslim world, and it talks about how the U.S. and France and Britain and some other countries are committed to always keeping corrupt politicians in power in all of the former colonies of the world, so that all the financial deals that existed in the colonial era would remain as is, unaltered, except for outer appearances. So, for instance, till now, all the countries, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, they can't sell their oil without reliance on French companies and either the dollar or the euro. In other words, you can't get out of the sphere of influence of France. Same thing with, let Egypt try to do anything to even get out. We Muslims have a huge role to, at a minimum, be the voice of honesty and conscience. At a minimum, just instead of in our masajid sitting there and talking about hijabs and whether a woman is covering her ankle or covering her hair, what is this? We've turned our religion into the religion of stupids and idiots. What is this? No, in our masajid we should be talking about ethics and morality and what's fair and what's right. That's our obligation. And it requires that we, at a minimum, demand higher standards in our institutions as Muslims, in our schools, in our centers. No, we don't want speakers that put us to sleep and that tell us the same boring stuff over and over and over again. We don't want speakers who don't know anything about the world, and it's obviously there are basically the most illiterate human beings that were brought from overseas to come spew nonsense about nonsense. We want our institutions, when we spend time in our institutions, to learn something, to be engaged, for our intellect and our soul to feel alive. So, sorry, we demand higher standards. This is the type of thing that will get us out of the darkness that we're in. But it is, it's not going to happen with everyone who's intelligent or educated abandoning Islamic institutions and running away, because that's, and as a professor, every time I encounter an intelligent, educated Muslim in college or in law school or in graduate school, and immediately I can predict the answer they're going to give me if I ask them anything about the Islamic center. Or, I stopped going there. I don't. And it's always the intelligent ones, the ones who are not so intelligent. You can always predict they're fine. No, it's not. It's a sad situation. It's not right. It's Islam. How can Islam be associated with ignorance and the people? Then those people just don't understand Islam. They really don't.
Do you have energy for one last question?
Okay, fine.
Okay. This is from Huda. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you always for sharing all of your knowledge and wisdom. May Allah reward you and may Allah grant you the most excellent health, inshallah. We are all making dua for you, Professor.
Thank you.
On Surah Al-Kahf, is there a best time to read it? I understand it is recommended to read it on Fridays, but does the part of the day on Friday matter, or is it recommended to read it anytime on Friday? And also I'm going to read both questions from Huda. In Ayah 82 in Surah Al-Kahf, it talks about the orphan boys who had a righteous father. Is it implied in the ayah that the children of righteous parents will be taken care of by God? Thank you.
Okay, these are good questions. Okay, about the time for reading Surah Al-Kahf. It is recommended, meaning it was the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ to read Surah Al-Kahf before the khutbah, before Jum'ah. However, if that's not possible, don't torture yourself to do that. It is still the sunnah that you just read Surah Al-Kahf every Jum'ah. If you can't get to it before the prayer, then just do it after. I think you'll be fine as long as you do it before Isha prayer. And again, it's a sunnah. I remember my mother, may Allah bless her soul. She would always finish Surah Al-Kahf right before Jum'ah, according to the original sunnah. But you know, everyone that talked about this from a fiqh perspective just says that you know, just finish it after Jummah if you don't get the opportunity to do so before. As to the second question, this is actually, there's a lot written about this in theological sources, and basically it's not a guarantee, but the salah al-aba, the fact that the parents were pious, among other things, it makes their dua near to Allah. And you know, any pious parent will always pray that their children and their dhurriya, their grandchildren are, and that dua is near to Allah. And which means that although there are no guarantees, because you know, evil intervenes in a variety of ways, and we don't know what Allah's wisdom is, and sometimes Allah's wisdom includes that children be rewarded in the hereafter than in this earth, but that the progeny of parents who were pious have a special status. You know, it is like an added layer of protection, but you know, it's not a guarantee. So, and here I think the moral of the story, if you notice that Khidr goes and fortifies a wall because society is unjust. Now, Khidr is in Surah Al-Kahf he is presented as a person who is Allah's agent. But what if Khidr is not there? The clear import of the story is that then you have to become the agent of goodness. Of course, this doesn't mean that, as I said before, that the ghulam, that surah, the killing of the ghulam, who you know, a lot of people think that he was a child, but he wasn't. He was a young man who was a highway robber. But the point is Khidr is symbol for what society should be doing. It is society that should be resisting an oppressive ruler who is stealing the property of people. It is society that should be fighting ingratitude in children and ingratitude in social structure itself, and the breakdown of social ethics. It is society that should be protecting orphans and not just counting on Allah to do it for them. And that is the real moral of the whole interaction with Musa and Khidr. Is, you know, Khidr is like bringing our attention to saying, well, here's Musa, here's Allah's prophet who has Allah's law, Mosaic law. But look at these real issues, real social problems, real moral predicaments. what are you going to do to embody the role that Khidr plays in this narrative? I say this because I've noticed in so many Muslim societies, in Islamic history, there was sort of a strong ethic, like in the same way that it was understood that if someone took the Quran and threw it on the ground or stepped on it, like immediately people would cringe, like, oh my God, are you crazy? Do you know you're defying God? God will probably do something really horribly bad to you. There was that type of ethic about orphans too. That there was sort of just a social ethic, like, oh my God, you don't touch orphans. You know, even if you're a criminal, like you would commit crimes against that. If someone tells you I'm an orphan, it's like, oh okay, you know, I'm not. Then you know, God will strike me down or something like that. And that was lost to the point that in the modern age, I've noticed. I mean, I'll talk about like people that I know in Egypt, families that I know in Egypt, that stealing the money of orphans has become like the regular type of thing. It's what you expect now to happen. Everyone steals. Like you have an uncle, you have an aunt, and they just steal the money that belongs to orphans. And it is one of the gravest sins that you can possibly commit. You know, it is like a sure ticket to hellfire. Like if you're going to steal the money that belongs to orphans, might as well stop praying and fasting because there's no point. But what, you know, what do you say? Again, you know, our mosques, instead of sitting there and obsessing about whether women are covering their ankles or not, talk about things that actually matter. You know, that this Islam is about. Oh, may Allah give us the strength and patience and wisdom.
Inshallah. Thank you so much. I know there's so much more that we could talk about, but this is so valuable, and I think, alhamdulillah, especially with Surah Kaf, I think it just completely puts everything on its head in terms of what Muslims thought they knew about it. It's extremely special. I mean, it just, you know, even struck me as you're talking about how, okay, Khidr is the teacher, or the man is the teacher of Musa.
Yeah.
And so what he is dealing with in terms of elevated justice or things that we don't understand, teaching the law. So law, by definition, takes a subservient position to ultimate justice that God sees. So that's a really powerful message for people who are so obsessed with law being the source of morality. So, alhamdulillah, thank you so much. So, okay, everybody, keep your prayers coming, inshallah. We are looking forward to hopefully having another amazing halaqah this Saturday.
Inshallah.
Inshallah, hopefully, inshallah, Sheikh will be well enough to give the khutbah on Friday. We're praying, so yeah, please keep us in your prayers, keep him in your prayers, and thank you for being with us. It's always wonderful to be here together through this. So, alhamdulillah, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.